I saw a report recently that said people that talk really fast have a higher percentage of heart disease. So I don't want that. I'm going to slow down. Actual report, real report, that people that speak fast, I think it's because they're probably type A folks, but that, I just letting you know. Have you ever had an urgent emergency, a really important, urgent emergency? Well, I did a wedding yesterday for the Hawkins family. Their middle daughter got married, and that's why a lot of those folks, the Hawkins and some of their friends, they're down at the Grand Bohemian today. They're worshiping probably on the pillow after the wedding. So, but we had a rehearsal, so I went down there. Have you been to the Grand Bohemian ever? Okay, I had never been there. It's smack dab in the middle of downtown Orlando. And downtown Orlando is like a lot of big cities. It's full of one-way streets, and so when you plug into your little GPS that you want to go to the Grand Bohemian, it will take you there, but you can't get there from here. There's no way in because where it takes you, it's one-way streets. So I was frantic. I was running a little bit late. I wanted to get there, and so I'm running around all these one-way streets. So I think I kind of know where it is and how to get there, but every time I came up to an intersection, it was the wrong one way. So I finally hit an intersection with no one-way sign, and I turned, and I started going down 3 lanes of traffic, and I noticed there were 3 lanes of traffic coming right at me. I had turned, it's your worst nightmare. I had turned the wrong way on a 3-lane, one-way, and here they all come. So what I did is I did one of those TV things. I spun my car around as fast as I could. I had to kind of go up on the curb, got down, and then I just slowed down and I blended in with everybody else. That is an urgent emergency, and I had that. It needed immediate attention. In each of our private worlds, there's sort of I wrote about this in my blog this week. We have a direct dial 911 line, and that's that signal that when it's activated inside of our minds and our lives, it'll cause us to act immediately with the greatest level of urgency that we can produce at the time, kind of like me flipping my car around as quick as I could. And you might identify with some of the triggers of the emergency 911. One trigger might be a pleading phone call from somebody who's in trouble. It could be a sudden life-threatening illness that you've discovered from someone in your family. It could be a serious car accident. That can be one of those immediate triggers. It could even be a burst water pipe in your home because you're going to stop everything and run home as quick as you can and try to deal with it. So there's many stimuli that may enter our personal spheres, but nearly every one of those things that happen to each of us, none of us are exempt from this, it'll fall into a pecking order, right? A pecking order of importance. The lower the importance, the lower on the list. And if it's way down on the list, you might not recognize it as being important at all. And so nothing happens. The things that are most dire, they go to the top of the list. They're screaming out for immediate attention. And we'll just leave everything aside and we will deal with that one. When that happens, when that trigger, that urgency trigger goes off, it's like, to quote the latest Avenger kind of movies, it's like Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk. When that trigger goes off, the adrenaline starts to pump through our bodies and we go through this transformation and we spring immediately into action. And as I said, if it doesn't, if it's not that important, it gets pushed a little bit down. It doesn't hit that urgency ceiling. And then it's kind of like, it's like Scarlett O'Hara. Tomorrow is another day. We just kind of leave it alone and maybe it gets done. So today we're going to begin a new sermon series. We're going to explore a season of urgency, a season of urgency for our faith community, urgency as disciples of an immediate Messiah, and that would be Jesus. And you'd have no trouble at all if you open up the gospel today, you'd have no trouble at all saying that there's a real sense of urgency in the gospel of Mark. You could say it's an immediate gospel. Because everybody connected with Jesus and everything Jesus does in the Gospel of Mark, it's just immediate. Urgency is the key word there. So I wanted to just quickly, this is going to be our passages for today. I'm going to run through them really fast. No, I don't want to get heart disease. I'm going to slow down and share them with you. So just all in the first chapter of Mark and maybe one out of the second. So in Mark chapter 1, verse 12, Jesus gets baptized. You remember that scene? And it says the Holy Spirit immediately, there it is on the screen, drove him out into the wilderness. Then Jesus starts his ministry. And what happens? It says, verse 18, just a few verses away, and immediately Simon and Andrew left their nets and they followed Jesus. 2 more verses down, verse 20. And immediately he sees some other folks and calls James and John. They left their stuff, including their father, and followed Jesus. Verse 23. And immediately there was a man in the synagogue with an unclean spirit. So there's a guy comes in for healing. Verse 29. And immediately Jesus left that synagogue after he'd healed the man and entered Simon's mother-in-law's home. That's Peter's mother-in-law. And immediately they told him, the disciples, that she was sick. Verse 42, Jesus and a leper. Jesus comes and sees a leopard. I actually used this in a chapel service last week. And Jesus goes up and touches the leper and heals. Here's what happens, verse 42. And immediately it says, immediately the leprosy left him. Last reference here. This is going into chapter 2 now, verse 12. There's a man who's crippled, and Jesus goes up and heals the crippled man. Verse 12. Immediately, the crippled man sprang up and left his feet. Now, I don't know if you've ever read the Gospel of Mark like that. Did you ever? That's just basically the first chapter of Mark. It goes all the way through. Everything is immediate. Everything is urgent. Everything connected. So as I said, you could call the Gospel of Mark an immediate gospel because Mark uses that word, immediate, 40 times. I didn't count that. Somebody else did that for me. But 40 times. Euthus that's the Greek word for immediate in the text. And it means straight away, go quickly, without zigzagging, more like a straight line, no detours. So in all these scriptural cases that I just mentioned, and I didn't do all 42, we would be here far too long, but it means that Jesus is acting immediately by taking a direct path from God's point A to God's point B. No detours, no deviations, no unnecessary delays. So you say, why is he acting in that way? Well, one writer suggests that what else do you do when you have the greatest, most amazing news in the entire world? What would you do if you had that news? You share it immediately. With whom do you share it with? The gospel says, everyone, everywhere, to all kinds of people, all places, everywhere, and do it with immediacy. And that's the essence. If you want to know the essence, summary of the Gospel of Mark, there you have it. So urgency is not just a driving force in the gospel. I think it's a driving force today in our world. If you just watch TV, I wrote down my own. But what do you hear the media is telling you that's urgent today? You can say it out loud. Buying things? Come on. Wrinkle cream, right? What else? Voting? Did you say voting? What? Come on, what are they telling you? It's so immediate. New car, right. It's got the TV. You can watch yourself backing up into stuff. You can see the one-way traffic coming at you. Okay, so there's lots. That's some of the ones. You mentioned some of the ones that I came up with. So here's the question. What is your urgency? Not what the media tells you it is. What is your urgency? What makes it onto your urgency list? If you were going to write it out, what makes it onto the list, that passes the ceiling of immediacy? And What part does that list, your list, my list of urgent matters, what part does that play for followers of Jesus Christ? I mean, that's kind of the key question we'll be looking at throughout the entire series. I think each of us, as you came in the door today, you have your own definition of what qualifies as urgent. But I think some people are a little bit confused about what rises to the level of urgency. So I thought I would share with you, these are actual 9/11 calls from the emergency department in Los Angeles. These actual calls that the dispatcher took down. So here we go. 18-year-old male, can't get any rest at home, wants a ride to the hospital. 13-year-old stubbed her toe on a stereo speaker. Called, it's what, urgent emergency. 61-year-old worried because her stomach is not growling. That was her level of. Lady has headache for 4 days because husband has no money for aspirin. Called emergency for that. Person answered no to the question. Person answered no to the question, are you conscious? Think about it. Someone called in with their urgent emergency that a bee was stuck in a child's nostril. That was, daughter says mom is acting weird. How many of you have done that, kids? You know, mom's acting weird. Let me call 911 on that one. Man was shot 2 months ago and now feels dizzy. says he's worried about the bullet. Last one. Well, yeah. Out of breath from running from the police. That was a good one. Somebody called in. Been running for. Lady from New York says she's been drinking, feels ill, spent all her money on jerks. So there you go. That's some people. Those were actual. Every one of those was an actual call that came in to 9/11 calls to the emergency department. Now I don't know about you, but I'm looking at these and I'm thinking they're not exactly what I would call urgent emergencies, right? It's so for those of you who are not sure what should be on the urgent list and what's more of a, I don't know, more of a minor issue, I put together my own little list I wanted to share with you today. And we'll see if I call this Pastor Joe's Guide to Knowing an Urgent Emergency from a Minor Issue. So are you ready? Number one, your friends got you to sample the 9/11 meltdown hot sauce before the food comes. That's urgent. That's urgent. I did it the other day. Your taxes are due in 2 days. Minor. That's on the minor list. Your fuel light came on just after you passed the sign that says last gas station for 50 miles. That's urgent. You have no clean underwear but lots of bathing suits. Minor. That's a minor one. Your alarm didn't go off and your wedding ceremony is in 10 minutes. And you're the pastor. That's urgent. That's an urgent one. While driving on a long trip, you and your spouse your spouse needs a rest stop. That's minor. Okay. While driving on a long trip, you need a rest stop. That's major. Okay. You just passed a state trooper while going 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. He turns on his lights, and you urgently pray that he's after someone else. And last, the all-you-can-eat buffet is not agreeing with you, and the bathroom is currently closed for cleaning. That's urgent. So that's kind of just in case you're confused about that. Since we have so many thoughts about what is urgent and what's not so urgent, it seems right, if we're going to start this series, that we define this sense of urgency correctly. Urgency comes from the Latin word urgere, which means press or drive. And it's related. I just turned the wrong page. How do you like that? I need to urgently find the right page. There we go. It's related to the English word that we use all the time, urge, right? If there's an urgent situation, it's a pressing issue for us, and we respond immediately. Urgency also has this sense of earnest and insistent need. So if you really want, all joking aside, if you wanted to know the key factor that what should be raised up on the urgency list, it's when something has an urgency, it requires speedy action, and that if you don't act immediately with haste, great harm could come about to someone or to something, damage of loss, life, property, loss of life or property. So here's not a funny example, a true one. When your friend calls you and says, get into your safe room because I just saw on the TV that there's a tornado and it's coming through your neighborhood. You respond to that voice, don't you? You hear that voice and you go, wow, I need to do something, so you scurry on to safety. Or if you're watching TV and you know how that buzzing noise comes on when there's something, and they tell you that there's very, very heavy rains are predicted with high levels of flooding, and then you think, oh, I guess I should fix the hole in my roof that's leaking. Those are, these are things you respond to with some sense of urgency. So back to my question to you today. What is it? What's at the top of your urgency list? What's at the top of if you're going to make a priority list, how do you decide what makes it at the very top? What are the factors you rate? I just told you the definition, but what do you rate that declares how you declare an emergency or an urgency emergency? In preparation for this series, some of you saw I put out on Facebook some questions. I asked, what are you most urgent about? What's pressing? What's really got you going, where you need to go from point A to point B in a straight line? And many of you responded with lots of ideas and your thoughts. But I put down just some of these are yours, and some are ones that I just thought about that makes it to the top of the list. An emergency call for many of our families. I think that would go right to the top. Any kind of a life-threatening situation to our friends, or maybe it's our own personal health. I think finances. Every now and then something happens in our. I got my credit card hacked about 3 weeks ago, and I found out we were getting these charges and were coming in, and we looked on there, and it was all this stuff from down at Disney, and I hadn't been down there, so I didn't sit around. We got on the phone immediately to the bank, and we canceled the credit card. So that was one for me. I think some of us worry what's going to happen when we die. We start thinking about that. Or what's going to happen with our kids? What's going to happen when I get older? Who's going to take care of me? What if I'm so sick and I'm not quite sure whether there's a cure for what I have? Will I be okay? And the last one I put on my list, is there any real purpose to my life in this world? Those are the things that in a serious way that I thought about, and maybe you've had some of those thoughts and maybe some others. A long time ago, before you had iPhones, smartphones, some of you had these day runners and day planners, and I had one called day timers. And the day timer was this big, I still have it, this big kind of notebook with one day at a time, and I could write down. And I went to a seminar on how to use the day timer calendar, and they told you to come up with your priority list and then number everything. And so every day you'd open up and you'd see the things you need to do, and the number one thing is the thing you did first, and you would check it off. And so I kind of have that idea. I'm wondering during your day, maybe even beginning today, what is it that causes you to move something to number one? That's one of the issues I want to be talking about. What makes it up there? And then this. When you put that at number one, what does your faith have to say about that? How does your faith relate to the one that you put as the top urgent priority in your life? Do you think God might have something to say about your and my urgent priority list? And if so, what is he going to say to us about that? According to Jesus and God's word, and then the influence of the Holy Spirit in this community and hopefully in this church, what are those three telling us should be the most important, urgent question or questions in our life today? So as we continue the series, we're going to seek to answer that question. We're going to be looking at lots of different issues and what part urgency plays for followers of Jesus Christ, if we're going to say that, if we're going to say we're followers of Jesus Christ, what part does urgency play? And then what happens when matters of our spiritual life are less than urgent? Does it affect us? How? And what would happen? What would happen if we embraced a Jesus urgency? Where I started with those passages from Mark. Instead of frantic busyness and running around going crazy, some of that just overwhelms many of us. What would happen? This is what gets me excited. What would happen if a church community began to embrace the urgency of a Jesus lifestyle? What would happen? What would that look like? I think that's worth considering for a few Sundays as we move forward, as we look at a season of urgency here at Markham Woods. Because when we understand and act with Jesus' urgency, I think you'll find in the coming weeks, we can do absolutely amazing things.